Hello everyone. Pray, work, trust God. The world we live in is full of questions. There is no shortage of reasons to despair or to question whether our efforts matter at all. Amid the noise and clamor of our daily lives, we are called to remember three simple things: pray, work, and trust God. These three are not separate acts, but form a seamless whole, and it is only when we see them as interwoven that we begin to understand how we are to live in this world. The role of prayer. Prayer, at its core, is an invitation to stand before God, to recognize both our smallness and His greatness. It is not, as many tend to think, a means by which we dictate our desires or manipulate divine outcomes. No, prayer is primarily about alignment. It is the quieting of our hearts, the moment when we come to grips with the fact that we are not the center of the universe. Prayer is our acknowledgement that we are creatures, utterly dependent on the Creator. We must first understand what prayer is not. It is not a mere exchange of wishes, a kind of celestial shopping list where we ask God to provide what we want when we want it. Some might argue, why bother praying if God already knows what I need? This is a valid question, one that goes to the heart of the matter. Prayer is not about informing God. He does not need our input on what the world needs, but it is about transforming us. We pray not so much for the change of circumstances, but for the change of our hearts, that we might see the world as He sees it and understand our place within His vast design. In this sense, prayer is like a dialogue, not a monologue. To pray is to begin a conversation with the One whose wisdom stretches far beyond our grasp. How often, when we face trouble or confusion, do we speak as though we understand everything? Prayer teaches us to listen, not just for answers, but for the presence of God Himself. In the silence of prayer, we discover that God does not always speak in loud voices or dramatic events, but often in the quiet whisper of peace, in the gentle promptings of the heart. Moreover, prayer is an act of humility. In a world that prizes self-sufficiency and independence, prayer calls us to surrender. It asks us to acknowledge that we cannot navigate life on our own, that the answers we seek lie beyond our own reasoning or ability. It is in this surrender that we find a kind of freedom, not the freedom to do as we please, but the freedom to trust that God knows better than we do. And as we surrender, we are shaped more fully into the likeness of Christ, whose life was marked by complete dependence on His Father. This is the paradox of prayer. In our asking, we find that we are given more than we expected. We may not always receive the specific answers we hoped for, but through prayer we gain something far more valuable, a deeper intimacy with God, an understanding of His character, and a peace that cannot be found through any other means. And so, prayer becomes the beginning of all things. It is the grounding of our faith and the foundation of all action. Before we work, before we act, we pray. In that moment, we acknowledge that we do not know what tomorrow holds, but we know the One who holds it. Prayer is the act of lifting our eyes, not only to the heavens, but to the deep mystery of God's will, the necessity of work. Work is often seen as a necessary evil, something to be endured rather than embraced. Yet, this view fundamentally misunderstands the role of labor in human life. We were made to work. not merely to toil under the weight of burdens, but to create, to shape, and to contribute to the flourishing of the world around us. In the very act of work, we join in the divine creativity of God Himself, who, in the beginning, did not create the world and then retire, but rather entrusted us with the ongoing task of stewardship. In a world increasingly focused on leisure and personal gain, work can seem like an interruption, an obstacle to our comfort or our ambitions. But when viewed through the lens of faith, work becomes an essential part of our calling. It is not just the means by which we provide for ourselves and our families, though that is certainly part of it. It is also the means by which we participate in God's redemptive plan. Our work, whatever it may be, becomes an offering, a way of bringing order and meaning to the chaos around us. Moreover, work is the arena where character is forged. It is easy to have faith when life is serene and success comes effortlessly. But in the crucible of work, where challenges are frequent and setbacks inevitable, we learn patience, perseverance, and the virtue of humility. Through work, we confront our limitations and discover our potential. It is here that we learn not just how to succeed, but how to fail with grace, to continue on when the way is unclear. In this sense, work is both a privilege and a responsibility, a place where our faith and action meet. To trust in God's plan. To trust in God's plan is perhaps the most difficult aspect of the Christian life, for it requires us to release our grip on the illusion of control. It is easy to trust when things unfold as we expect, when life follows the path we have charted. But trust becomes something far deeper and more profound when the road is rough, when the outcome is uncertain, and when we are faced with trials that seem to defy any rational explanation. Trusting God's plan means accepting that His understanding far exceeds our own. We are creatures bound by time and space, limited in perspective, and yet we often approach life as if we have complete knowledge of what should be. God, in contrast, stands outside of time, seeing the full tapestry of our lives from beginning to end. Trust is the willingness to let go of our limited understanding and yield to His greater wisdom. At times, God's plan may seem incomprehensible, even harsh. We may struggle with suffering, disappointment, and unfulfilled desires. Yet, to trust is to believe that there is purpose behind every trial, that each moment of pain or confusion serves a greater end that we might not yet perceive. Trust is not blind optimism, but a conviction rooted in the character of God. A belief that He is good, that He is just, and that He is always at work for our ultimate good, even when we cannot see how. In this trust, we do not abandon effort or work. Rather, we surrender our expectations, knowing that the outcome, in God's time, will be right. In life, the journey is not one of passive waiting, but active engagement through prayer, work, and trust. Prayer aligns our hearts with God's will, reminding us that we are not self-sufficient, but dependent on His guidance. Work, far from being a mere obligation, becomes a sacred partnership with the Creator, a means by which we participate in His ongoing work of creation and redemption. And trusting God's plan, grounds us in the certainty that, despite the unpredictability of life, God is at work, weaving all things together for good. These three elements, prayer, work, and trust, are not isolated acts, but interwoven steps that shape the way we live. They are the foundation upon which we build our lives, the means by which we navigate both the highs and lows of our existence. In embracing all three, we learn to live in harmony with God's purpose, finding meaning and peace in the process.